We interrupt this program to bring you breaking news. Teenage Engineering has released a firmware update to the OPZ that allows the unit to sample internally. This is the biggest news on this device since its release. So now that the OPZ has sampling, the questions that remain to be answered are, how does it work? What's the workflow? And how useful will that be? To answer these questions, we turn to our resident tech correspondent in the field. Bob, take it away.
Thanks, Chuck. This is some exciting news coming from Teenage Engineering. Hot off the heels of the OPZ's release in late 2018, now in the summer of 2019, we see a highly sought-after feature being added to the device, which opens up the possibilities of its use and value. So let's see how this works. First, there are a few things to know. 1. The sampling feature was added to firmware release 1.2.5 in July of 2019. 2. The iOS app was updated to correspond with this release. 3. The OPZ can sample from 3 sources: the built-in mic, the TRRS mic input, or over USB audio. 4. The OPZ now acts as a 2-channel audio interface over USB. 5. Recorded samples are stored in user-created sample packs. And 6. There are 2 distinct sample types, or engines, on the OPZ. Drum, which has 12 seconds of sample time, and Synth, which has 6 seconds of sample time. Before we dive into this process, let's quickly explain the difference between the Synth and Drum sample engines. For those who are familiar with the OP1 and PO33, the 2 sample engines function the same way on the OPZ. And the OPZ sample features are based on that of the OP1. Basically, the drum samples are divided into individual steps, and each step is assigned to a note on the keyboard. This is great for sampling drum breaks and chopping samples into individual sounds. It also works well with melodies and vocals where you want to rearrange the sounds into your own phrasing. Then there is the Synth sample engine. Here, a single sample is transposed across the keyboard, giving you several octaves of range to program your sample. Tracks 1 through 4 on the OPZ use the drum sample engine, and tracks 5 through 8 use the Synth sample engine. Let's see how these 2 sample engines work by first looking at the Synth sample engine. Press and hold track and then select a track between 5 through 8. Now we need to create a user sample pack, otherwise called a plug. To do this, press and hold track, then select a slot between 0 and 9 that is unlit, and hold it until the light sequence finishes. A default sample will be placed into the sample engine. It's worth noting that unlike regular sample plugs on the OPZ, which have several presets per plug shown in the major keys on the keyboard, the user sample pack will only display 1 note on the major keys. Since we're on the topic of user sample packs, if you wish to delete a user sample pack, press and hold the track, and then hold the user pack number until the light sequence finishes. The number light should be unlit when you finish. Now, again in our user sample pack, let's enter sample mode. Hold stop and press record to enter sample mode. Note, the sequence of these button combos matter, so make sure you press stop first, then record. Also worth noting, you can only enter sample mode within a user-created sample pack. The lights on the unit will change when sample mode is engaged. The 16-step sequencer lights now display information about the sample in the engine. Green corresponds to the start point of your sample, and it also corresponds to the green encoder dial. You can adjust the start point of your sample with this dial. The blue LED is the endpoint of your sample. Here you can see the lights change as you move the endpoint of your sample with the blue dial. The yellow dial is pitch control of the sample, and the red dial is sample gain. There is also a second layer of menu functions. Pressing Shift toggles between the primary and secondary menus. In the secondary menu, green is sample loop start point, blue is sample loop endpoint, yellow is sample direction, and red is sample pitch in halftones. Also, the LEDs under the encoders are colored white to correspond with the primary menu and yellow for the secondary menu. No corresponding numbers are displayed like other menus within the OPZ, so make sure to check which one you're in before adjusting the parameters of the sample. The keyboard keys will function as they did when the OPZ was in sequencer mode. It will play back the sample in the engine when you press these keys. However, the octave keys will follow the same function as the yellow encoder in the primary menu, which controls the sample pitch. Looking at the app screen will show you the pitch adjustment of the sample. It's important to note that the transport buttons have different functions when engaged in sample mode. Press the track button to engage a test tone. The tone is of a 440 Hz frequency. This is an interesting feature to be added into sample mode. It could come in handy if you wanted to tune your guitar before sampling. And although that's cool, like some things that TE does, they are more cool than practical. For example, the metronome that plays vocals counting in various languages. Since we are on a bit of a tangent, this would be a good time to point out that the accompanying app and screen display is quite useful when it comes to using the new sampler features. Let's pair our phone gizmo and take a look. And we can see some additional information on the screen, such as our user pack file information and visual display of the sample. There is an input meter on the side, but as we'll see in a moment, the input feedback on the unit is actually quite nice. Warning, if your OPZ is connected to monitors, turn them down or try using headphones before trying this next step. Pressing the play button will toggle monitoring of the input. The play button will be lit when the monitor is engaged. The default input is the built-in microphone. The 16 steps of the sequencer now displays the input level of the incoming signal. It will show clipping on the right-hand side in red LEDs, so try to keep your signal from hitting those. Input gain can be adjusted by holding down Shift and selecting a step between 1 and 16. 16 having the highest gain. When you're ready to record, press and hold record. This will start recording the sample and it will finish when you let go. During the recording, the red LEDs displayed on the step sequencer will show you the length of your sample and the allowable time left. Now we have our own sample loaded into the OPZ. We can record over the sample again if we follow the previous steps, and we can make adjustments to our sample. It can be helpful to look at the screen for a more informative and intuitive experience, but you can also do this without the screen or by ear. Let's adjust our start point. Pay attention to the LED color of the encoders. Remember, white is the primary functions and yellow is secondary. In the screen of the app, the colors of the parameters will be solid in the primary menu and they'll be grayed out in the secondary. Let's adjust the green dial clockwise until it's just at the start of our sample. Adjust the blue counterclockwise to trim the end. If you wanted to pitch shift the sample, you could do that now, as well as adjust the sample's gain. If we exit sample mode by pressing stop, we'll be back into the regular sequencer mode of the OPZ. We can now make further adjustments to our sample, as with any sound on the OPZ. We can adjust the filter cutoff, ADSR, LFO, and effects, etc. We can also sequence our sample as we would any other synth or drum track. This would be a great time to talk about input sources of the sampler. The sources are the built-in mic, the mic input over the TRRS 1/8" input, and the ability to use USB audio. Using the USB connectivity would mean connecting to a computer or phone and setting the OPZ as an audio interface. Since this is the most useful way to sample on the OPZ, we should look at this more closely. First, connect the supplied USB cable between the OPZ and a computer. Now we need to adjust the settings of the computer to route audio to and from the OPZ. On a Mac, it's pretty easy to do this. Go to System Preferences, select Sound. You should see the OPZ listed both under an input and as an output. Under the Output tab, select the OPZ from the list, and now audio should play through the OPZ. For PC users, this should be a similar process depending on which operating system you're running. Now, let's test our source input signal. Make sure a user sample pack is the selected plug on the synth track. Press and hold stop, and then press record to enter sample mode. It's worth noting that OPZ seems to automatically switch over to the USB input when it detects a source. Press play to engage monitoring. On the computer, find an audio source to test. Adjust the input gain on the OPZ so you get a decent level. Press and hold record to record a sample. Letting go of record will stop the recording.
The OPZ can't sample, but it can. The OPZ can't sample.
At this point, we can circle back around to the other sample engine on board the OPZ, which is the drum sample engine. Remember, the drum sample engine is only on tracks 1 through 4, so we need to switch to one of those tracks. Press stop to make sure you're back in sequencer mode. Press and hold track and then select a track between 1 and 4. We could sample a drum break or an acapella into the drum sample engine. But what if we wanted to sample our own drum hits? Well, since the OPZ is now an audio interface, we can get more value and convenience from the device by connecting it directly to our DAW. So let's explore this really quickly. Open your DAW and go to the Audio Hardware Preferences. Then select the OPZ as an input and output. We can now set up the Z as an external instrument, routing MIDI to and from it as well as audio. But in this example, all we really want is to sample some drums and record them on the OPZ for use there. Let's start by creating a MIDI track and load it with a drum kit. Now load the drum kit with whatever samples you want. Now you can either program a pattern in the DAW to replay the samples one by one in order to record them into the OPZ, or we could just simply play the drum hits one by one using a MIDI keyboard, for instance. On the OPZ, press and hold record, and on the MIDI keyboard, play the drum hits in the sequence that you want them recorded on the Z. Let go of record on the Z when you're finished. Now we can see the primary difference between the drum sample engine and the synth sample engine. Your drum hits should be laid out across the keyboard. The LED of the step sequencers will show which start and end points are to each drum slice, and where that step is relative to the whole sample. It's important to note that the drum sample section uses a single audio sample, but in software it plays back slices of it when you press those keyboard notes. And the OPZ is doing so in a non-destructive fashion to the original sample. So when you connect your OPZ to the computer, looking for the samples you recorded, you will find them there, whole, not chopped. But on the OPZ, you can also adjust the start and end points of all the parameters found in the synth sample engine for each individual step in the drum sample engine, which is awesome. Just as in the synth sample engine, pressing the stop button will exit sample mode and the OPZ will now return to the sequencer mode where you can program your pattern. Now that we have an understanding of how sampling works on the OPZ, we can think about how it fits into a workflow. And here we'll discuss some of what I believe are the shortcomings of the new sampler features on the OPZ. Given that a mic is the primary import source on the sampler on board, it caters to a style and workflow that is sampled physically and acoustically in front of the unit. It can lead to some really organic and natural sounding beats. This can inject life into your music by sampling what's around you. But let's say that's not your thing. Maybe you want to sample some vinyl. Well, you could sample from a speaker into the mic, but there's some signal loss and fidelity using this method. In other words, limiting the sampler to a mic will lead to some really lo-fi sounding beats. But there's a counter argument. Just use the USB audio functions and sample direct from a computer. Yes, that's a great feature. This obviously adds tremendous potential to the unit. However, if the OPZ is already connected to a computer, then it may be easier to drop samples directly into the sample folders within the OPZ. That is, if you're playing samples off your computer hard drive, it would be faster to drop several of them into the device than to create a sample pack for each and sample them individually. You can even use the OP1 drum utility tool to create your drum kits on your computer, then transfer them to the OPZ. But where the USB integration is convenient is in the ability to sample anything coming off the computer's sound card. This is the power of this feature, and it's great to have. There are a few more criticisms of these new features. First, the TRRS input. Having a line level input is what makes most samplers usable. The OP1 is a great example of a versatile sampler due to its line level input and internal radio, giving you a slew of sources to sample. So the TRRS input on the OPZ was a bit of a letdown to only accept a mic input via a mic similar to that on Apple's old stock headphones. This is unfortunate because it's basically going to give you the same as what the built-in mic already will. I have heard of people using older iRig type interfaces with TRRS connectors to help expand some of the inputs on the OPZ. Although I haven't tried this yet myself, maybe that could be a separate video, but the point is, TE set up the OPZ to have a mic level input on its 1/8" connector. So unless this is a hardware limitation of the device, it seems like a shame to limit it to a mic input. If it's able to be changed in software, then there are a few more things that would be great to see updated in the software. First, the choice to make the record button of the sampler momentary instead of latching is also a shame. I know, It's the same as the OP1 and the KO, but think about it. You have to have at least one finger of one hand engaged while sampling, which limits what you can do with your hands while recording. If you want to sample yourself playing a guitar, you would have to play the guitar one-handed or ask someone else to record you. If the record button in sample mode were a latching toggle type switch, you would then be able to record and free up the use of both hands. Next, unless I'm missing something, there just doesn't seem to be a way to copy and paste samples between the sound plugs. This again seems like a missed opportunity, or maybe there is a way to do this. If you know, please leave a comment below. Teenage Engineering is notorious for leaving features out of their user guides, so maybe this feature exists, but they just forgot to mention it. Otherwise, it would be awesome to both have this feature, and it would be amazing for TE to give users in-depth manuals. But I digress. Lastly, the biggest miss that I thought TE had on this feature update was the lack of integration with the OP1. It is plausible that many users have both units, so the lack of integration in terms of sampling features between these two units was disappointing. Currently, the two units are plug-and-play compatible in terms of syncing MIDI, but with the new addition of USB audio integration on the OPZ, wouldn't a quick firmware update to the OP1 seem like a great way to reward loyal users? Well, if the OP1 lacks the ability to transmit audio over USB, then I can understand that limitation. That foresight would have been amazing though. After all, the OP1 has a line level input and a built-in radio. Just let users sample from the OP1 to the OPZ. That would be a wonderful update to this update on the OPZ. In terms of the future of sampling on the OPZ, there is still potential for it to be better through another software update. The potential is also there in pairing with the OP1. But one other potential way to increase value and usefulness of the sampler is via a module. Putting a line level input into a modular that can be accessed from the OPZ sample mode seems like an obvious solution, but this would mean buying an accessory to do so. However, I think most users would benefit from having a line level input to sample from on the OPZ. Alright Chuck, that's it for this update on sampling on the Teenage Engineering OPZ. Back to you in the studio. Thanks Bob. Before we sign off this evening, we just want to thank all of you for your support in growing this channel. This program is made possible by viewers and subscribers like you. Please smash that like button and subscribe for more awesome content. Lastly, we want to hear from you. How do you like and use the new sampling features on board the OPZ? Please comment below. Thanks.